Good evening, everyone, and welcome to 30 minutes of Torah study for the Torah portion of Chukas and Balak. So it's April 11th, 1956, the village of Kfar Chabad in Israel, in one of the yeshivas. Arab terrorists break in, they march into the shul as they are davening Ma'ariv, opening up fire, spraying bullets at all those who are davening there. 5 of the students and 1 of the rabbis are murdered in cold blood. 10 other people, 10 other students are shot as well. The Chabad community in Kfar Chabad was horrified. They could not believe, they could not process what was happening to them in Israel. The vast majority of the Hasidim who were living in Kfar Chabad at that time were Hasidim who suffered terrible persecution, who experienced pogroms, anti-Semitism, communist Russia, and finally escaped to the Holy Land, to the land of Israel, where they thought they will be able to serve God and live a life of peace. And here, terrorists break in Israel itself. They thought, oh no, are there going to be pogroms in Israel as well? Could you imagine the trauma that those Hasidim went through, that those Hasidim experienced going through this moment? How do we deal with trauma? How do we respond to trauma? Now, each and every one of us has experienced some trauma in our life, hopefully not to the extent of experiencing a terrorist attack, but maybe you've been in a car accident. Maybe you would experience some type of health issue, maybe some family fights, right? We all have experienced something negative, something painful, something traumatic in our past, that if we recall it, if we reflect on it, it bothers us, it incenses us, it angers us, it frustrates us. How do we move past it? How do we move on? Are we meant to totally, completely forget about it? We know, of course, ultimately, the most healthy thing to do is to reframe that negative experience, to be able to look at it in a totally different light. And that's what we are going to try to do today. We're going to begin with the letter from the Rebbe that was written in response to a person who was suffering from a medical condition and was dwelling on it, was immersed in the pain, the discomfort, and it was controlling and taking over the person's life. The Rebbe writes like this: with respect to your healing, I make the following recommendations. Number 1, surely you're following the instructions of your physicians. Number 2, to the extent that you can, stop dwelling on your health issues. Number 3, strengthen your faith in God, for whom nothing is impossible. Step number 4, strengthen your bond to the tree of life, the Torah of Chassidus, the living word of God. So this person was not dealing necessarily with a past trauma, but with a present and a future trauma. And the Rebbe tells him something very powerful and also so obvious. Worrying does not help. There is no benefit to the worrying. You will not go to a doctor with a terrible medical issue, and the doctor will write you a prescription that you should sit and worry about it and dwell on it. That's not only is it not helpful, but it's counterproductive. So the Rebbe says to him, very simple. You went to a doctor, go to a doctor, right? Do what the doctor says. Take care of what you need to do from a medical perspective. Don't dwell on it. Outside of that, forget about it. How do you forget about it? By strengthening your faith in God. God runs the world. God runs the show. Nothing is impossible for God. And how do you get there? Strengthening your bond to the tree of life. Torah, Chassidus, do something positive. Another way of saying it is, after obtaining proper care, place your trust in God and fill your time with meaningful study and good deeds. This is the type of reframe that we want to do, that we want to apply to past events, to past traumatic events as well. However, when it comes to the past, we don't want to completely forget about the past trauma. From time to time, it's actually healthy and beneficial to remember it and to recall it. And we learn this message from this week's Torah portion, which is a double Torah portion, the portion of Chukas and the portion of Balak, and we're going to talk a little bit about Balak. Who is Balak? Balak is the newly appointed king of Moab, He is described in the Medrash as perhaps the most vile, rabid anti-Semite ever to exist. He's not unique in the fact that he wanted to wipe out the Jewish people, man, woman, and child, but is unique for the style, the approach that he went about doing this. Everyone else, violence, the sword, the gun, the bomb. That was not the approach of Balak. Balak felt he would not be successful if he went conventional warfare. He wanted to have a prophet of God curse the Jewish people. In other words, he was using that which is most unique about the Jewish people, their spiritual identity, their relationship with God, turn that against them, turn their old souls, their old spirituality against them, and wipe them out that way. So a cruel and evil man. Balak hires Bilam. Bilam is a non-Jewish prophet, a spiritual master, a person whose words have weight, who have impact, who has miraculous abilities to curse the Jewish people. However, no curse can go into effect without God's permission. So what's the result? The result is that Bilam blesses the Jewish people in the most powerful and beautiful way. The Torah portion is then named after this wicked king, Balak, the most rabid anti-Semite ever to exist. His name is listed in the Chumash. On Shabbos and Sol, we're going to announce we are reading the Torah portion of Balak. Does this make any sense? Right? Why dwell on a traumatic experience and name a Torah portion after a well-known anti-Semite? Would you go to the Adolf Hitler Jewish Community Center? Absolutely not. It makes sense. Any person who would choose such a name, you would think they are insane. How would a person feel walking to a building with such a name on it? Balak is in the same category as Adolf Hitler. How could we have a Torah portion named after such an evil person? It's triggering, it's traumatic. Anytime you hear the person's name, the frustration, the discomfort would absolutely be there. This is not just a question that has to do with our attitude, how we feel when you hear the name, but there's actually a prohibition that's involved. As a general rule, Jews don't perpetuate the legacy of wicked people. This is a Torah prohibition. You're not allowed to do so. And I will demonstrate this for you. The Medrash writes, Rabbi Yitzchak said, one who utters the name of a wicked person, but fails to add a curse, transgresses a positive commandment. What is the source of this commandment? The verse says, the name of the wicked must be left to rot. You cannot mention the name of evil just like that. You can't throw it out there. The Torah says if you're going to mention evil, you must curse that person as well. I don't know if you've ever heard someone say, Hitler Yimach Shemoy. Have you ever heard that expression? Hitler Yimach Shemoy? Yimach Shemoy means, may his name be erased. Very often in the Jewish community, when the name of a truly evil, wicked person is mentioned, it will be followed by the words, Yimach Shemam V'Zichram. May the person's name be forever forgotten, be forever erased, because we cannot say the name of the wicked. So how do you have a Torah portion named Balak? Maybe it should be called Balak Yimach Shemam. Balak, his name should be erased. But how do you have a Torah portion that's simply named Balak? Another source from the Talmud. What is the meaning of the name of the wicked must be left to rot? Rabbi Elazar said, decay will spread on their names, for we will not name others by their names. That means as if there's a truly evil person with a name, never ever do we name someone after them. Right? Perhaps an example of that would be Adolf. Adolf at one point in time maybe was a popular name. However, no one in their right mind is going to name their kid Adolf today. So too, from a Jewish perspective, it is prohibited, it is forbidden to name your child after somebody that's wicked. Yet, we have a Torah portion named after the most wicked of the wicked. So why then do we name the entire Torah portion after the wicked Balak? There are so many better names we could use. First of all, if we have to tell the story, the evil prophet Bilam blesses the Jewish people. The Torah portion could be called blessings. the Torah portion could be called bracha. Yet instead, we have Balak. We're going to answer this question by looking at another law, which is actually very similar. There's a law in the Torah that says you are prohibited from mentioning the names of idols. Let's look at the source. In the book of Shemos, it says, do not mention the names of other gods. Because of this, right, there is a religion that is called Christianity, and there is a person who figures quite prominently in that religion who has a God status. Many Jews have a custom not to say his name. What might they say? Yashka, right? You may have heard this expression before. They do not want to utter his name. However, from a halachic perspective, technically you are allowed to, which is, I don't know if we'll have time to discuss that today, but Jews are so uncomfortable even saying his name because there's a biblical permission, do not mention the names of other gods. Now the Talmud gives an example. Do not mention the names of other gods. For example, a person shouldn't say to somebody else, wait for me besides a certain idol. Now, you're not worshiping the idol. You're not even acknowledging its status as a religious thing. Yet the Torah says we don't mention the name of idols. Don't mention the name. Don't give a person directions and use that idol as a reference point. Even though you're not conveying any spiritual value, there are certain words we don't say, certain ideas that should not come out of your mouth. We do not say the name of an idol. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. We continue in the Talmud. When the sage Ula arrived, he overnighted in Kalenbo, a city named after an idol. Rava asked, where did the master stay? Ula replied, in Kalenbo. Rava said, but does the passage not state, do not mention the name of other gods? Ula replied, so taught Rabbi Yochanan, we are permitted to mention the name of any idol that appears in the Torah. So here we have this great Talmudic sage Ula, and he is naming the name of a city which is named after an idol, which would appear to be a clear violation of the Torah principle. We do not say the name of idols. But he says, no, I'm allowed. Why? The exception is when the name is mentioned in the Torah. Since the name of this town, the name of this idol is mentioned in the Torah, that is an exception. You're allowed to say it. But why does this make a difference? Why should it help you that you're allowed to say it if it's mentioned in the Torah? At the end of the day, an idol is an idol. There's nothing more repulsive, there's nothing more disgusting from a theological perspective than an idol. It should be repulsive for a Jew to verbalize, to have the name of an idol in their mouth. Why should it make a difference that the Torah uses it? So there are many answers, but we're going to just highlight two of them because it's an important message that we learn from it. The first answer comes from the school of Tosfos. Tosfos were people who were students as well as grandchildren of Rashi. They lived in France, Germany, even in England, probably about 800 years ago. And they asked the question, why does the Torah itself use an idol as a reference? Let's look at the next text here. The Torah says that the Jewish people camped in front of Baal Tzefon. I saw that Rabbi Yehuda wondered why God instructed Moshe to have the Jews settle near the ocean in front of Baal Tzefon. Do we not say that it is forbidden to tell our fellow, wait for me before a certain idol? If you're not allowed to tell a person, wait in front of a particular idol because you can't say the name of an idol, why does the Torah say that the Jewish people camped in front of Baal Tzefon? Baal Tzefon is an idol. Rabbi Yehuda concluded by observing that this is a difficult matter that requires deeper analysis. It seems to me that the answer is simple. This prohibition was only ever binding on humankind. It was never binding on God. So Tosfos is a very simple answer. The prohibition is that we're not allowed to say the name of idols, but God is allowed to. It's not binding on God. Now, are you satisfied with this answer? I would think not, for two reasons. One, there is a principle that God obligates himself in all of Torah and mitzvahs. God is not like a human being who orders people to do things but doesn't do it himself. So if the Torah says we're not allowed to say it, God's included in that prohibition as well. And the second question is, even if you want to say that God somehow has the power, has the ability to say the name of the idol, how does that give us permission? How are we allowed to just because God is allowed to himself? So let's go to another answer. Any idol mentioned in the Torah may be mentioned. Why? The reason is, once it is mentioned in the Torah, it has certainly been obliterated. So here we have a very interesting answer. In the Torah, God only mentions idols that have been obliterated. What does that mean? Today, in the year 2023, does that idol worship exist? Is it still a religion today? Are there people walking the earth who believe in it? The answer is no. Any idol worship that is mentioned in the Chumash, that's mentioned in the Torah, that's in the biblical text, are no longer idol worships today. They're not religions today. Therefore, they don't have significance. They don't have value. They don't have meaning. So it's not an issue today for a Jew to mention something that is in the Torah. However, even with this answer, we still have a problem. The problem is because there are idols that are mentioned in the Chumash, in the 5 books of Moses, that are also mentioned in the books of the prophets, which took place hundreds and even sometimes 1,000 years later. If the Gemara says that any time God mentions the name of an idol worship in the Torah, it's obliterated, how does it work? If God mentions the name in the 5 books of Moses and it still appears in later books of the prophets, then clearly it's not obliterated. So how are we meant to understand this? How can we mention the name of idols? The Rebbe is going to answer the question so powerfully, so beautifully, so straightforwardly. The Rebbe writes to answer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Shimon meant to say that the names of false deities mentioned in the Torah are obliterated in the minds of Jews who mention them. When the Torah mentions the name of a false deity, it is certainly to underscore its vanity, emptiness, and absolute lack of power. The Torah seeks to highlight the idol's utter falsehood and the error of those who worshipped it. It follows that the appearance of a false deity's name in the Torah reverses and nullifies any supposition that it might have power. On the contrary, it underlines the idol's emptiness and falsehood. By the same token, when we mention the names of idols that appear in the Torah with similar intention, we too dismiss the idol's importance and substance. Idols that the Torah revealed to be without substance are as good as obliterated in our minds when we mention their names. Under such conditions, we are permitted to mention the name of the idol for the same reason that the Torah mentions it. So the Rebbe explains that when God deals with the idol worship in the Torah, in the Chumash, he obliterates them, not from history, but from our mind. When God mentions an idol worship, we recognize with absolute certainty, with absolute clarity, that idol worship is false. It's baloney, it's ridiculous, it's an embarrassment. There will be no appeal, there will be no attraction. So therefore, a Jew to mention the name, it's of absolutely no significance. So God mentions idols in our presence to obliterate their legitimacy from us. This is why God mentions those names, because by mentioning the name, he's obliterating the value, the significance of that idol worship. And that is why we today are allowed to reference those biblical idol worships as well. And we could use that idol worship if we were giving direction, because it does not exist. It's obliterated. When we say the name, it's a joke, right? It's funny almost, because it's so embarrassing that it ever actually existed at all. So we have just explained the exception to the rule when it comes to naming idols, right? Idols that were mentioned in the Torah were obliterated by God. They have no meaning. They're essentially a spiritual, religious, theological joke. So therefore, we could say them. There's no threat. There's no issue. Would this same logic apply to the names of the wicked, right? We're not allowed to say the names of idol worship unless they were mentioned in the Torah. Is there such an exception that would apply to the names of the wicked? Maybe the names of the wicked that were mentioned in the Torah, we could say as well. So look at what the Chidah writes. The Chidah says, Rabbi Yochanan taught, we are permitted to mention the name of any idol that appears in the Torah. Similarly, we should be permitted to mention names of wicked people that appear in the Torah as well. So the exception that applies to idols apply to the wicked as well. So the name of Balak is a name we are allowed to use. It does not have to be erased. It absolutely is appropriate to use as a name because it was used in the Torah. Because when the Torah mentions this name, when the Torah tells us the story of Balak, it is absolutely the biggest, the largest insult that wicked person ever could possibly have. That wicked person wanted to wipe out and obliterate the Jewish people. What happened? He was obliterated. He was wiped out. We were blessed. And we're still kicking today. So therefore, when we recite the name of that evil, wicked person, Balak, and we mention, and we even name a Torah portion after it, it's not highlighting Balak. We're actually stepping down on Balak as hard as we possibly could. When we have a Torah portion named Balak, we are not giving power to someone who's evil. Rather, it represents their full and true and complete obliteration. When we mention the name of Balak, it is not something that brings trauma on us or the Jewish people. It's actually something that's very empowering. It's something that's incredibly powerful. When the names of the wicked are mentioned in the Torah, it is to reverse their power. Such mentions empower us to overcome the trauma and put the wickedness to bed. Balak was the biggest anti-Semite. He hated the Jews and wanted to do what Hitler wanted to do. But he had a more devious way of doing it in a spiritual thing. And you know what happened? He tried. And he was defeated. He lost. The biggest insult we can do to Balak is to name a Torah portion after him. The Rebbe writes, the Torah tells the story of Balak to broadcast the breakdown of his evil plan. He said to Bilam, please come and curse these people for me. Perhaps I will be able to wage war against them. And this plan was foiled. This is not in conflict with the dictum, the name of the wicked must be left to rot. On the contrary, such mention increases his shame and accelerates the rot of his wicked name. The same is true of naming the Torah portion after Balak. When we use the name Balak in reference to a Torah portion, we refer to him as the Torah does, not to perpetuate his name, but to amplify his shame. What could this be similar to? Forcing the Cubs to wear Brewers jerseys. Forcing, diehard Bears fans to wear Packers jerseys, right? The biggest insult is when you have to recognize the victory of the other side in the most powerful way. The greatest, largest anti-Semite who wanted to destroy the Jewish people, what is he? He's a name in our Torah. He's a name of one of our parshas. That's ultimately who he is. So, but it's much more than that, right? So by mentioning the name of the wicked, we accomplish more than we would by ignoring him. This undermines them and accentuates their self-destruction. But it's not just that we're accentuating the self-destruction. It's not just by naming a Torah portion Balak, we are giving the greatest possible insult to Balak. But for us, it's actually an incredible blessing. Look what the Rebbe says. Balak's evil intentions were not only neutralized, as when an idol is obliterated, rather in hiring Bilam also helped the Jews. It resulted in transcendental blessings for the Jewish people. This is a much greater achievement than neutralizing a false deity. When we nullify a false deity, a denial of God's unity, we must obliterate it. Balak's story is different. The wickedness and hatred that caused him to hire Bilam to curse the Jews were not merely neutralized, they ended up aiding the Jews with transcendental blessings. This is an even deeper reason for naming the Torah portion after Balak. Through him, more accurately, by him hiring Bilam, the destiny of the Jewish people was enhanced. It's not just that we're insulting the greatest enemy of the Jewish people, we are recognizing that precisely because of his plot, not only were the Jewish people not destroyed or weakened, but we were empowered, strengthened, blessed in a way that we never could have been otherwise. So naming a Torah portion Balak is the greatest testimony that the enemies of the Jewish people, they can scheme, they could dream in any way that they wish. But at the end of the day, not only will their plans be foiled, not only will their plans be destroyed, but the result is going to be greater blessings for the Jewish people, greater success for the Jewish people, greater health for the Jewish people, and so on. So Balak, when we have a Torah portion named Balak, it doesn't traumatize us with negative memories. It reminds us that all anti-Semites are going to be obliterated, and at the end of the day, the Jewish people will live on, and we must live on in the most proud way possible. So by reading the story of Balak, we are reminded that God has our back, then and today as well. They may take counsel, but it will be foiled. They may speak words, but their plan will not succeed, for God is with us. So we began the class with the question of how do we process trauma? And at the beginning of the class, we mentioned that if the trauma drags you down, if you dwell on it, if you sit on it, if it depresses you, you got to forget it. You got to let it go. Stop thinking about it. And we have that 4-step plan, which the Rebbe laid out. However, there is a better way to deal with past trauma, and that is to reframe that past trauma into a positive light and view it in a way that it empowers you, it strengthens you, and it actually energizes you. We reframe traumatic memories in healthy ways that empower us. We highlight God's protection and our strength, leading us to action. And this is the message of Balak. We reframe the pain and the trauma of an attempted genocide into remembering the fact that God runs the world. We're still here today, and we were blessed tremendously by the whole experience. And this is a very powerful message to Holocaust survivors as well, because there were so many Holocaust survivors that were traumatized by their experience, and it's very understandable. They were tortured by the memory, the pain, the suffering that they had, and they simply had trouble moving on. Right? The pain was so heavy. What is the Rebbe's response to Holocaust survivors? The Rebbe writes, in our post-Holocaust era, we cherish the memory of the sacred martyrs. May God avenge their deaths. It's important that our generation know about the Shoah, and even more important, that they never forget that the 6 million sanctified God's name. On the other hand, considering the teaching of our sages that action is primary, it's most important that we remember our greatest obligation to respond to the Holocaust by doing all that we can to rebuild the lives of Jews and the verve of Jewish life in the greatest quantitative and qualitative measures. This is the correct response and the correct war to wage against Hitler and his successors. May their names be obliterated, who sadly, rather than having decreased, have perhaps even increased, albeit in alternate forms and guises. What does this mean? There are more Jews today studying Torah in yeshivas. There are more students of yeshivas and girls in Jewish schools than at any point ever in the history of the Jewish people. And this is after we suffered the Holocaust. Why? Because we have to be motivated by the memory of the 6 million that we need to study more Torah. We need to do more mitzvahs. We need to have bigger, better, larger Jewish institutions. So our response to the Holocaust has to be, we have to use it to motivate us, to empower us, to energize us, to live as proudly and as Jewishly as we possibly can, to be bigger and better than before. We can't let the memory of the Holocaust sink us down, bring us down, or to decrease Jewish life. Exactly the opposite. We have to highlight it to increase our Jewish life. In other words, when we mention the name of Hitler, we say Hitler Yimach Shemam. May his memory be erased. He wanted to wipe out the Jewish people, and he is gone. He is synonymous with evil. But the Jewish people live on today, bitter, bigger, and better. than we've ever done before. More Torah study, more yeshivas, more shuls, more kosher restaurants in every place on earth. That is what it means to reframe a tragedy and to use it to empower the Jewish people. And this was the Rebbe's response to those Chassidim in Kfar Chabad who felt, should we run away? Should we leave Israel? There's terrorism here. We thought it's going to be safe. We left Russia. What did the Rebbe say? Through building, you will be comforted. How do you respond to a tragedy like that? You use it to build a bigger school, a greater school. Use it as a place to bring even more light into the world. Because you experience such darkness, now you know and you can feel the intensity of what it means to bring light and goodness and holiness to the world. The greatest revenge is to live on. The greatest revenge is to build even more than what was there before. Because that's just not revenge. That's how we achieve victory. Right, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If anyone has questions, comments, thoughts, I'll be happy to answer. But I also want to point out that this Shabbos at 7:30 p.m. in Shul, Scott Linton is hosting, he's sponsoring a men's Farbrengen. So 7:30 p.m., all the men are invited to Shul. I know there's going to be nacho brisket. There's going to be a lot of interesting, wonderful food. So 7:30 p.m., a special Farbrengen hosted by Scott Linton, but it's going to be in the Shul because it's a little easier. I hope that everyone will be able to join us.